We're very excited today to host Glen Weyl. He's an economist and author and a social technologist, working on kind of like understanding how markets and democratic governance and technology can be used to distribute power more broadly. At the moment, right, if you think about technology and AI companies, they're concentrating more and more kind of like power in centralizing it. And so, the question then is like, how can we kind of like push against this trend and allow kind of like collectives and kind of like people, and in this case, kind of like pluralism, to basically be kind of like a counterforce to kind of like get what we want out of this new type of technology. Glen leads the Plural Technology Collaboratory at Microsoft Research and has co-founded many organizations like the Plurality Institute and Radical Exchange. And he also has a new set of books kind of like talking about these topics. We're very excited for him to come and tell us how to be to build the superintelligence that we really want to see, rather than what will just happen out of circumstance. This is something that's very difficult to do, and I'm personally very excited to hear his thoughts on this topic. So with this, let's welcome Glen and give him a round of applause.
Thanks, Eugene, and thanks so much. I realize this is probably too long of a title, but it's actually how to be the superintelligence you want to see in the world. So it's all of you. And that's a very different vision to the usual discourse that you hear about superintelligence. So the usual vision is you've got this autonomous system, it ingests a bunch of stuff, and then its goal is to compete against humans to show, that it can autonomously outperform human systems. And to that, I want to contrast an alternative vision of superintelligence, which is very allied to James Lovelock's idea of Gaia. So Gaia is this notion that the Earth in whole constitutes sort of a self-sustaining organism. And in this vision, the tools that we build integrate with the human social systems and the ecology to create a system that is self-sustaining and growing. And in this vision, superintelligence is not something new. It already exists in corporations, in democracies, in markets, in religions. All of these outperform individual human beings on a whole range of tasks. And so the question then becomes, how do we, as a collective entity, become more collectively self-aware and more performant, rather than how does a subsystem within that, a very small subsystem within that, some digital model, outperform some other small subsystem within it called an individual human being. And I think the reason why we've made kind of more progress in thinking about this competing against humans model than in this sort of like collective superintelligence model is that a lot of the elements that are necessary for achieving the competing model can be more precisely quantitatively stated in a way that people can compute over, or have been. And I'm a recovering economist. I haven't really been a practicing economist for a decade. But sometimes I fall off that wagon when it comes to the role that I think economics can play as sort of a way to translate between some of the social elements that are necessary to constitute a sort of collective social superintelligence and some of the technical elements. And I think it can go in both directions, and I want to try to show some examples of that today. So in particular, I want to try to take some sort of abstract ideas from sociology that I think are critical to collective self-awareness, ideas like community, and see how those might become targets for computational optimization. And on the other hand, I want to take some computational formalisms like neural networks and say, what would it mean for a social and economic and political system to be structured like those, rather than just for a neural network to be, electronic neural network to be structured those ways. And I think economics can offer some formalism that helps us go in those two directions, so that instead of targeting this like narrow digital system that competes with human systems. We can instead target the way in which we integrate that overall ecosystem using the technology as a way to make the biosphere more intelligent. Okay, so what are those two formalisms I want to talk about? The first one is this idea that is very well known to economists and game theorists, but has only recently become more widely known publicly. So Steven Pinker recently wrote this excellent exposition of these ideas called When Everybody Knows That Everybody Knows. This is the idea of common knowledge, and it's a very widely used idea in economics and game theory, but I'm going to argue that it can become a very powerful way to take some of the things sociologists have talked about and turn them into targets that we might optimize over computationally. And the other one is the idea of a neural network. So neural network, even in the name, neural, evokes an analogy to the brain. But actually the networks, these types of networks that are now being trained, were actually originally imagined as ways of modeling firms in an economy. And so I want to follow that analogy a little bit and see what that might imply about how we could sort of jointly optimize this social system that includes these digital elements. Okay, so let me start with the first one. So community is perhaps like the most important and core notion in sociology. And if we're going to get something in our digital systems to sort of like actually integrate with social systems, it's going to have to include some notion of community, and in fact, this is widely recognized. So if you go to any of the advertising of the social networks, they're constantly talking about community. All the analysts of social networks are constantly talking about community. But community is a kind of hard notion to tie down. On the one hand, if you go to a civics textbook, like I've been teaching to my 6-year-old daughter, it will say that community is the set of people who occupy some physical space together. And yet, and there's certainly something to that. And in fact, many people have been arguing that sort of digital world has been eroding the sense of community because people who are sharing a physical space together don't interact as much because people are on their phones or whatever. On the other hand, there is a very long tradition in social theory as well as other areas arguing that community does not require or can't only form through physical space being shared. And in particular, there are books like Benedict Anderson's Imagined Communities, which argues that the nation state is sort of this community that comes into existence through other means. And that Nancy Baim, a very prominent communication theorist and sociologist, argues that like online communities can actually be powerful forms of community. So clearly there's something about community that is facilitated by shared space. And yet, at the same time, there may be something that is more information theoretic and therefore could be targeted in the design of digital spaces. And so I want to look for some notion, some formalizable notion that might have these properties. And I want to argue that this idea of common knowledge from game theory and economics might be a good candidate for this. Okay, so what is common knowledge? Common knowledge is things that are not just known by everyone, but that everyone knows that everyone knows, and everyone knows that everyone knows that everyone knows, and everyone knows that everyone knows that, et cetera. Okay? So this idea might sound a little bit abstruse, but it actually plays a central role even in classic folk tales. So there's, raise your hand if you know the story of the Emperor's New Clothes. Most people, okay. So in the story of the Emperor's New Clothes, there's an emperor, he's actually naked, but, some very fancy advisor sends him out, undressed that way. And so everybody sees that he's naked, but nobody realizes everybody else is seeing that, and so no one's willing to laugh because of the consequences. Until a child laughs. And that causes everyone to realize what's going on, and so they can all laugh together at it, right? So this is an illustration of the notion, which has become very important to social science in the past decades, that these commonly shared understandings are very important to collective action. And this, is, very famously captured in political science by the notion that protests can be much more effective than pamphlets. So pamphlets might be much more broadly distributed, but protests can actually accomplish more because nobody knows who else is reading the pamphlets, right? I might have just gotten the pamphlet, and lots of people might learn from it, but that doesn't mean that they see that other people are understanding that, and therefore they're not willing, in a risky situation, to undertake, a protest or an action against the regime that they don't think will be supported by other people. This notion was not just an abstraction; it actually became a critical engineering target in the 2010s. For some of the most sophisticated actors in the world, in particular the Chinese government. So the Chinese government, according to a number of excellent political science papers, did not actually use as its primary defense against collective organizing the censorship regime, the Great Firewall. Instead, they used polarization and distraction attacks, where they would have these millions of people called the 50-cent army go out and post on social media whenever there was like a nascent organization, something that would divide that group and polarize them or distract them from the issue that they were organizing around. And this is based precisely on the theory of disrupting common knowledge. It's based precisely on the idea of breaking up the ability of people to come to a common understanding of a grievance that they might have, rather than on just suppressing information entirely. And in fact, partly inspired by some of those studies, social psychologists have been studying what has been going on with our polarization and fragmentation with social media in the West. And what they've found is one of the strongest and most consistent correlates, and according to some studies, even causes of kind of the feeling of isolation and fragmentation and polarization in the social media era has been failures of higher order knowledge. So people stuck on their phones don't know who else is consuming that content with them. People think that Republicans are much more tolerant of violence, or Democrats are much more tolerant of violence than they actually are, or think that Democrats think that they're more tolerant. In fact, the higher you go in these hierarchy of beliefs, the more distorted people's views become, and that strongly correlates with effective polarization. Okay, so that sounds all very gloomy. We, had the Chinese trying to divide their own society, maybe even exporting these techniques to authoritarians in other places to undermine common knowledge. But one thing that we're lucky is that there is kind of like a version of like Ukraine developed all these decentralized, drones to defend itself against Russia in the information space, and it's called Taiwan. So Taiwan was facing, according to many metrics, by far the largest concentrated disinformation, polarization, blah, blah, blah set of attacks earlier than anywhere else in the world was. And as is often the case, you develop the inoculation if you're facing the pandemic, right? And so Taiwan developed this series of mechanisms precisely to overcome these types of attacks and recreate common knowledge, using systems, among them, I'll illustrate one, which is this vTaiwan system, which is based on an open source technology called Polis. So what does this do? It takes social media, and rather than just serving you the most engaging things, it clusters opinion groups, and then it surfaces the things that bring people together across the disagreements in those groups, as well as showing you the representative opinions of people in each group, so that people can have an understanding of what they're disagreeing about and what brings them together across those disagreements. And this became the basis of an idea called bridging ranking, which is now a quite prominent area, and it then inspired community notes, which is a system that replaced fact-checking on X and now has replaced it on almost all the social media platforms, where citizens propose comments to posts that have been made if they think they might be misleading, and then people give reactions to those comments are clustered across their perspectives, and then only the things that bring people together across those diverse perspectives are permanently attached to that post. Okay. Now, there are a number of limitations of community notes. One of them is that most posts don't end up having a note attached to them, partly because it's really just meant as this sort of fact-checking thing rather than as a broader steering for the overall algorithm, but also because there's really no incentive to write these posts. You don't even get fame from them. All you get is that the post shows up. So it doesn't have a very strong business model associated with it. Another issue is it doesn't affect the underlying content serving algorithm. So something can go completely viral and then eventually gets a note posted on it, but it doesn't affect its virality at all. It also is all based on a US political spectrum. And there are so many other issues and divides going on within the community that aren't based on that. So Audrey Tang, who was the digital minister of Taiwan and who implemented all this stuff in Taiwan we talked about, and I and some others have been working on a way to more broadly redesign social media using the insights from community notes, but making them apply to the overall environment. And the basic notion, which actually is now just based on our work being piloted on X, is that you label all posts with the communities that find them consensual. So, for example, imagine that you have some, really anti-abortion content, and you're a Catholic, a Republican, and an American. At the bottom of your post might show up a picture of the Holy See with a green circle around it, saying that that's a consensus thing within Catholicism. Green thing around a picture of an elephant, so that's a consensus thing within the Republican Party, but a red circle around the US flag, saying that this is actually divisive in the context of the US. And click here, you'll get navigated to other prominent perspectives from other perspectives within that other community that you're a part of. So that's like the basic idea of this concept of pro-social media. And the notion is that this can be surfaced using the same algorithms that underlie community notes, but applied to the more complex graph that is the recommender system. And that this actually implies a business model as well. So you can charge those communities for upranking in the content of their community members content that brings their community together or that gives important balancing perspectives to people within that community. So that the model becomes not just charging advertisers, but charging communities for content that brings them together. And in fact, we also think it can be valuable to advertisers because the most valuable advertisements per minute of attention are not actually personalized ads. Those mostly end up serving you things to get you to empty your Amazon cart. And in fact, there's even dispute about whether you would have bought the thing anyway, even if you hadn't clicked on that ad. The most valuable ads are actually Super Bowl ads because Super Bowl ads can create meaning. They create the notion that Apple is for rebels or that Coke is for sharing. And because that is a shared idea among many people, it's not something that a personalized ad can really accomplish because it leads to the same sort of isolated sense. Whereas if you're able to have these sort of community contexts where everyone's consuming something together defined by these algorithms, then you can attach ads to that with the consent of the community, and that actually might be a more valuable business model than the existing one. Now, actually, while we designed this for social media, we think that the most powerful application of this may actually be to chatbots. So right now, you may have noticed that chatbots often hallucinate, and they often speak from a God's eye view. They kind of give the truth. But unfortunately, one reason that they're hallucinating is there actually is no God's eye view of the truth on most issues. And so they end up getting confused between different perspectives, and this is one of the things that drives hallucination. So we're thinking instead about this model of pluralistic alignment, where the chatbot responds to you from one of the perspectives of the communities that you're from. So you ask it about abortion, just like I said, the abortion content, then it might say, the Orthodox Catholic view is as follows, but you're also an American and a Columbia student. Would you like to hear contrasting perspectives from, within the US or Columbia on this issue? And we believe that this might, as in the social media environment, both help, make the content more relevant and aligned to what is helpful to creating community rather than fragmenting people and making them just listen to and have a relationship with, the God of AI. But it also might help avoid hallucinations because there's a clearer target for ground truth that can be used for reinforcement. Okay, so that's one side of what I wanted to talk about. Let me try now to take a formalism that's more heavily used in computer science than in sociology, and try to translate that to a social structure. So the usual vision that you get of neural nets is it's this thing in silicon with tons of parameters, and it's totally separate from and maybe competing with humans. But actually, one of the pioneers of neural networks, John Holland, thought of this instead as a way of modeling supply relationships among firms. So there's customers who buy products from retailers, who buy them from wholesalers, who buy them from intermediate producers, who buy them from original goods producers, et cetera. And that profits flow backwards along this network and the products flow forwards. Just as in neural network training, there's a back propagation of a reward signal that creates the relationships among the nodes in the network. And the thing that's useful about this alternative model, if you think of this as just modeling sort of a set of economic relationships rather than being some separate silicon thing, is it allows you to organically include not just the neural networks that are modeled, but also the unmodeled neural networks inside of people's brains. Because the input data to the networks comes from biological processes and including humans that are supplying the initial input, and which don't get the signal that the model wants to send backwards out the input nodes from all the training that goes on inside is just being dissipated. But instead, it could be used to establish relationships with those biological and human systems that are producing that input data to jointly train the entire model to perform. So how do we interpret? Imagine we could get those linkages. How should we interpret those? Well, the simplest interpretation would be value payments, so that the people who are creating the data that ends up being important to those nodes would receive payments when the model creates economic value. But it's important to understand that neural network nodes, the primary reason is not to backpropagate the value signal. That's just a means to an end. The real goal is to assign authority to those nodes so that they can help make decisions. And in the same way, we know that in economies, there are not just networks of payments, there are networks of control. These are share ownership, which is actually a very complicated network in most firms in the economy. And in fact, to my knowledge, this diagram here is the oldest thing that looks like a recombinant neural network that was ever drawn by human hands. Does anyone know what this is? Or can anyone give me a counterexample of something even older than this that looks like a recombinant neural network? So this is the voting system from the 13th century in Venice for the Doge. And the way that it would work, this is the OG Doge, not the Doge in Washington, which has been shut down, by the way, so did not persist as long as the Doge of Venice. So the way that it would work is that the electors would choose members for 5 of 100 councils, and then each of those councils would choose members for 5 of another 100 councils. And so you got like a neural network-like structure like this. So actually, what's going on within these neural networks anyway is a bunch of complicated democratic process. It's not some external alien thing. And so there's just a very natural way to think about alignment or integration of human input into these systems, which is rather than just have people give some overall decontextualized score to something, the people whose data is actually training those nodes anyway can intervene on the way in which those nodes are representing concepts. And this is the basis of this work that we've been doing at Microsoft with Jaron Lanier and many other collaborators on this idea of data dignity, of trying to use the actual structure of the models and the way that they're being trained to determine control and economic rights over the behavior of the model, and thereby to directly integrate the human neural networks and the digital neural networks. Okay, so what's the broader theme between these two things? So on the one hand, we're constantly hearing about how AI is just on the verge of taking off, controlling everything, and either bringing us to a paradise or, killing us all. And we're kind of more scared of the second maybe than we are excited about the first. And on the other hand, we see in business, this is a bubble. Like, you know, there's all this stuff and it's not actually being used. Okay, so like, how could those things possibly be consistent with each other? My claim is they're actually two sides of the same coin. They are both a result of us detaching the technology from the human systems. Because if it's not integrated with the human systems, it's not productive. And if it's not integrated with the human systems, it can run amok and kill us all, right? And so instead, we need to embrace a vision where we are the superintelligence, where it's actually a human system that we're building, just like a corporation or, you know, a market or a democracy, and bridge the chasm between those two worlds. And there's so much work to do around that. I hope some of you will be interested in doing some of it. The Plurality Institute is an academic convening body that tries to get together research in this area. But just to give you a few examples of things that I think are really exciting. In Japan, politics is increasingly being structured around these digitally mediated, new forms of democracy, and no one's studying it. So it would be great if someone went out and tried to study that and make sense of it. We're doing a bunch of research. I think we actually have one collaborator here at Columbia, I'm not sure, on this, on how to implement these systems in social media platforms using this open source project, Green Earth, which is for Blue Sky and other open source media platforms. But we also work with a lot of the right-wing platforms that use similar technologies like BitChute. And, these really rich forms of democracy that are not just like linear vote aggregation, but use, things like neural networks, I think are incredibly promising. But both haven't really been studied theoretically by social choice people, and we don't really know how to make them transparent and legitimate to people. People tend to just say it's the machine doing it, even though I think that's just totally confused and mistaken when things get complicated enough. So how do we make these transparent and make people feel a sense of legitimacy in these processes? I think those are all really exciting directions for research, and there's many more that I'm happy to talk about in questions, and I think I'll wrap up there. Hopefully I haven't used more than a reasonable amount of time and we can have lots of discussion. Thank you.